I'm Speedy Gonzalez, the fastest mouse in all Mexico. Okay, here I come, camarados. Hija, ándale, arriba, arriba, hija, epa, epa. Hija, ándale, arriba, arriba, epa, epa. Hija.
Oh man, that guy was great. Welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. So today we're going to be taking a look at a tool that you use on a regular basis, and that's the Speed Square. Now this thing's got a lot of markings on it, and you may not be quite sure what all these markings mean. But I'm going to walk you through all these markings, and I'm going to show you 15 ways we can use this tool. So let's get started. Now first off, we need to give some respect to this tool. This tool was invented in 1925 by Albert Swanson. And I'm pretty sure this guy had no idea we'd still be using this tool on a regular basis in 2023. Now I've got 3 speed squares in my shop, including the original Swanson. Now there's been a lot of knockoffs of this tool over the years. However, in my opinion, there's nothing that can compete with the original Swanson Speed Square. Plus, after all those years, this thing is still under $10. So we're going to be using the original Swanson Speed Square to show you the functionality of this tool. And like I said in the intro, I'm going to show you 15 ways on how to use this tool. We're going to start off with some of the most basic ways, and then we're going to move on to some of the most complex uses. So let's grab that square and get started with our first use. So one of the first features that I want to talk about with the Speed Square is the base. It's got a nice level base that allows you to easily rest it against any work surface. This makes it a piece of cake when you're trying to determine whether or not a corner is square. Having this flat level surface really is great when you want to confirm the squareness of any corner. So who would have thought you can actually use this Speed Square as a square? Now let's move on to the second feature. So for the first use of this square, we already talked about the flat base that makes it easy to tell if something is square. But this thing also acts as a lip. Let me show you what I'm talking about. It's this lip of the square that allows you to rest it against things like 2x4s, plywood, or MDF, and know that the edge of your square is completely perpendicular to the edge of your material. And that brings us to the second use of this tool, scribing perfect 90-degree lines. Next up, we've all realized that this is a triangle. However, this is a 90-degree isosceles triangle, and that means that each one of these corners is at exactly 45 degrees. So this means, just like we did with the 90 degrees, we can use that little lip to place it on our material and create perfect 45-degree angles. So let's do that next. And it's this 45 degrees that's perfect for creating miters. Whether you're doing a picture frame or you're squaring up a box, that 45-degree angle can get you the perfect miter. So not only can this tool be used to scribe lines, but it can also be used as an accessory for a circular saw. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So a lot of times when you're working outside, you don't have the luxury of having a table saw or a miter saw. You're simply working with a circular saw. And a lot of times when working with a circular saw, a lot of your cuts can be inaccurate. And that's because you don't have a fence that your table saw has or your miter saw has. But what if I were to tell you you can actually use a Speed Square like a table saw fence when you're creating your 90-degree cuts? Let me show you. So first off, let's talk about how you can place your Speed Square on a 2x4. You can either place it this way, or you can flip it around and place it this way. Now I typically do it this way, but I've recently discovered that it's a little bit more comfortable to place it this way. Once you have your circular saw aligned with where you want to make your cut, you simply slide your Speed Square in place against the base of the circular saw and you make your cut. And by using the Speed Square as a fence for your circular saw, you can have the confidence to know that all your cuts are at exactly 90 degrees. But that's not the only fence we have with this Speed Square. You can see there's also a 45-degree fence. So let's try that out. When we use the Speed Square for a 45-degree fence, we place it on the opposite side of the circular saw. We line up our cut of the circular saw, and then we place the Speed Square right against the base of the circular saw. Now we're ready to make the cut. So whether we're using the Speed Square as a fence for a 45-degree cut or a 90-degree cut, this thing is the perfect accessory for any circular saw. So now that I've shown you a couple of ways you can use this Speed Square with a circular saw, let's move over to the table saw and see how we can use it over there. So as we all know, you can adjust your table saw blade from 90 degrees to 45 degrees. And there's usually a dial on the very bottom of your table saw to make this adjustment. However, this dial isn't very accurate, and that's where the Speed Square can come in handy. Since this is a square, we already know that that's a perfect 90. So we can rest this right up against our table saw blade and confirm that we have a 90-degree angle. With our blade raised up, we can place that square right up against our blade and confirm that we're right at 90. But as we said before, we also know the Swanson Speed Square has a perfect 45-degree angle. We can also use this to set up our table saw blade so we can ensure it's at 45 degrees as well. So by resting our Speed Square against our table saw blade, we can adjust our blade and get it to the exact 45-degree angle. So by using our Speed Square to align our table saw blade either to 90 degrees or 45 degrees, we can be ensured that all our cuts are going to be exactly where we want them. Next up, we're going to get into the interior of the square and take a look at these little teeth that are on the interior of this triangle. These things are perfect for when you need to scribe out lines on your workpiece. So if we take a closer look at the square, you can see that there's little notches at every 1/4 of an inch. These go from 3/4 of an inch all the way up to 2 3/4 of an inch. These are made to place your pencil into those notches. When you place the lip of your square against the edge of your material and your pencil into one of those notches, you can create perfectly scribed lines. Not only that, but this Speed Square has also got a ruler along the length of the Speed Square, and this is 7 inches wide. So you can use this in combination with your scribing feature to create perfect lines. So if I wanted a line right at 2 inches, I'd scribe a line right on my ruler, then place my pencil into the scribe line and create a perfectly scribed line. It's these last two layout features of the square that can be really helpful when you're doing your rough layout of your projects, or you're doing things like breaking down sheet goods. Obviously, the precision of this square is something that I wouldn't rely on when you're doing your final measurements. However, if you're breaking down rough lumber, this thing will do the trick. Next up, let's talk about how we can use this Speed Square if we have an angle that's not at the 45-degree angle or the 90-degree angle. Let's say you need to lay out a line that's 26 degrees exactly. Now you may think this may be very difficult to do. However, with the Speed Square, it's quite simple. Let me show you how. So if we take a closer look at the Speed Square, you can see that there's little notches running down the length of the Speed Square, and these are increments of 1. These go from 0 all the way up to 90, and these are actually degree measurements. These are used in combination with a pivot point, which is located at the bottom right, and you can figure out exactly what degree angle you're looking for. So let's use this tool to find that 26-degree angle. Let me show you how to do it. So there's a couple of things that we want to be aware of, and that's this pivot point. And you can see that this pivots along the lip of that Speed Square, and you can rotate it back and forth. Now what we're looking for is the edge of the workpiece. So if I find 26, which is right here, I can pivot this Speed Square to the 26 and strike a line. Now if I strike a line at 90 degrees, I'll know that this angle right here is exactly 26 degrees. And with this Speed Square, you can find any angle going from 0 to 90, and there's an increment at each degree angle. Well, that's 10 amazing uses for this Swanson Speed Square. Before we move on, I ask you to do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, leave a like and leave a comment, as it really does help out this small woodworking channel. Now let's move on to some more uses. So our next couple of uses for using the Speed Square relate to creating rafters for roofs. Now you may not use this when you're doing your woodworking, however it's nice to know. So the first thing that we want to determine when using the Speed Square is the pitch of the roof. And the pitch of the roof is simply the rise over the run. And the rise is in inches and the run is in feet. So if we have a roof that's rising 12 inches for every foot it moves over, we're going to calculate this by taking the rise over the run. So we're going to get a value of 12. So now that we know that the rise over the run is 12, we can now figure out what angles we need to cut our boards to make those perfect rafters. So let's take a look at our Speed Square. In order to cut the angles of our rafters, we're now going to use the common area of our hip valve. And you can see there's little markings here going from 1 to 30. Since we know the pitch of our roof is 12, we're simply going to pivot our Speed Square until this 12 reaches the top of our board. Once we have that alignment made, we then can strike a line. Once we've found that angle, we then can cut our 2x4, and this will allow the rafter to perfectly meet the ridge board. So if we look at this drawing here, you can see the angle that we just struck on our 2x4 to allow us to make our rafter hit the ridge board. But there's also a hip rafter. Let's go back to that drawing and I'll show you what those rafters look like. So this is the hip rafter, and this rafter is just a little bit longer and it's at a slightly different angle than your normal rafter. And because of this, it's got a different angle where it meets the ridge board. But that's okay, because the Speed Square can also accommodate for the hip rafter. Let me show you how this works. So for the hip rafter, instead of using these exterior measurements, we're now going to move into the interior measurements. And just like before, we're going to pivot our Speed Square until the 12 reaches the top of our board. Once we have that aligned, we then can strike a line on our board. And it's the subtle variation in the angle for the hip rafter that will allow us to attach it to the ridge board perfectly. So I'll be honest, I'm not a roofer and I've only built one roof in my life. So if you do have more experience with building roofs, leave a comment below and let us know if there's a better way to explain this. So now let's move on to our next little use for a Speed Square. Did you know you can use a Speed Square for a level? Well, I didn't either until I discovered this little hack. Let me show you how. So in order to use a Speed Square as a level, you're just going to need a couple of things. Either some twine or some string and some weight. In this case, a pipe fitting. So to make this Speed Square a level, we simply rotate the Speed Square until the pivot point is at the very top. Then we take our weighted string and place it into that pivot point. Now what we're looking for is for the string to be right at 45 degrees. Depending on where your string lies, you can adjust your board until you have it right at 45 degrees. Well, that was a new one for me, and I found it to be quite interesting. Just by using a string as a plumb bob and placing your Speed Square on edge, you can make sure that any surface is completely level. This next one was also a new one for me. You can actually make a circle out of this square. Let me show you how. So for this one, all you really need to do is to place a nail directly where you want the center of your circle to be. Then you place your Speed Square right on top of that nail, and you use the notches on the Speed Square to create the perfect circle. And there you have it. Now there's a lot of pivot points on that Speed Square where you can place your nail to make circles of different diameters. You could also do things like round over the ends of 2x4s to create that rounded profile. So we're down to the last of the 15 uses of the Speed Square. Let me show you something that I just discovered after researching the Speed Square. So you may or may not have noticed, but there's a diamond on all Swanson Speed Squares right at 3.5 inches. Why at 3.5 inches? Well, as everybody knows, a 2x4 isn't actually 4 inches wide. It's actually 3.5 inches wide, and that's what this diamond's for. So here, just to confirm, you can see I have a 2x4, and if we place our Speed Square right on top, you can see that diamond falls right on the edge of the 2x4. So this diamond can be very helpful if you're doing some construction. Let's say you're laying out some walls on a building, you can figure out exactly where your 2x4s will land on your floor. And by having the diamond shape, it makes it extremely easy to scribe lines, whether you're going in one direction or the other. Well, that's 15 uses of the Swanson Speed Square. Now, I'm sure I've missed a ton of them, so if you have any others, leave them in the comments below so you can share them with the rest of us. Well, thanks for joining me today, folks. I really appreciate you watching, and if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. Until next time, take care as always.